I find you absolutely fascinating, and I really enjoy talking to you every time we've talked before because I think you and I agree on like the end results. And part of what I don't think we disagree. I think there's just like nuance to how we get from where we are to that end result, which
Mm,
ultimately I like to think you and I are both rational enough to say like, hey, I don't know exactly what's going to happen, but like here's where kind of like I think the world is going and how it's playing out. One of the
mm.
things that is one of those nuances that's fascinating to me is you talk about you're either aligned with Bitcoin or you're not, or your actions are aligned with Bitcoin or they're not. But there's no such thing as Bitcoiners. And so, I saw you tweet this recently and I was like, man, that's like pretty interesting. Like explain that a little bit more as how there's no Bitcoiners, but like your actions could be aligned with Bitcoin or not.
Yeah, I think it's an interesting lens to it, right? A lot of people immediately think that if you can be a Bitcoiner, right, like you can somehow represent this as a technology. But I think that's not really a good way to look at it, right? As people, we ultimately just don't have that much of an impact on Bitcoin, right? It is this neutral monetary system that operates sort of outside of us. So I think when I say, your actions either align to Bitcoin or they're not, what I'm trying to say is that, I think people look at it as a binary perspective. Oh, this person isn't a Bitcoiner because he said something that we don't like, or oh, this person isn't a Bitcoiner because he supports these other things that aren't Bitcoin. And I like to look at my life a little bit differently, right? I try my best to align my work with Bitcoin. I try to make sure that what I'm doing has a positive impact. And, but I'm not a Bitcoiner like in every sense of the word. Like I'm going to go to the grocery store, I'm spending US dollars, right? I'm not furthering the Bitcoin economy in that moment. So I'm not aligned with Bitcoin in that moment, right? As a philosophical movement that is attempting to make change in the world. Does that make me a bad person? No, it's like at that moment, I'm not aligned with Bitcoin. And I think it's a more nuanced perspective because I think what we're both sort of arguing about and talking about is this tendency for people who are really involved in Bitcoin to sort of claim some ownership of it and use that as a way to sort of attack or target other people to try to kind of I guess bring them to the Bitcoin side, right? So I guess it's just a different perspective for me, right? I wasn't someone who was initially a Bitcoiner. I was a journalist. I was someone who was essentially paid to be quote unquote objective about what was happening with the Bitcoin market. But over time, I just felt that that was misaligned and it didn't really and I don't really even know today whether it's best to describe me as a Bitcoiner, right? I'm someone who simply tries to align as much of my work and human time as possible with Bitcoin, but there are limits to that. And if you have some idealistic standard for what a Bitcoiner is, I might not live up to that, and maybe that's okay, right? Like maybe there's a good discussion to be had about how we're both perceiving what is good for Bitcoin, and that's maybe a healthier way to look at it.
Yeah, what's fascinating about this is it's almost like if you take every single action you have throughout the day and you were literally to score them on like good for Bitcoin, bad for Bitcoin,
Right.
agnostic,
Right.
a person who is in the Bitcoin community would be trying to optimize for as many of those actions to be good for Bitcoin as
Right.
possible, but it would be nearly impossible to actually get 100%. And so in some way, people are trying to categorize like, what do you have to have? 80% of the actions? 50% of the act, like what is the cutoff for Bitcoin or not Bitcoin? But I do like this idea of essentially how many of the actions on a daily basis are aligned with the asset, with the community, with the network. And if you think of it that way, you really are the sum of all those individual decisions. So you start to almost try to change your behavior in a way that increases the total number of decisions that are aligned with Bitcoin.
Right. And I think that's all you can do at the end of the day, right? So I think when people have problems with quote unquote Bitcoin toxicity or the way that Bitcoiners behave online, it's oftentimes that they really feel that people are just putting forward an impossible standard, right? That nobody could possibly live up to being this sort of ideal Bitcoiner. And I think it's an interesting lens to look at it, right? Like who is the ideal Bitcoiner? Is it someone who's, saving Bitcoin all the time and never spending anything? Is it someone who's trying to further the Bitcoin network by, actually spending it and actually advancing the economy in some way? So I think it's a way to look at it by just acknowledging, as you said, like the human limits of it, and also divorcing yourself from feeling like your whole personality or identity is is derived from being a Bitcoiner, right? There's often there's many other things that I'm sure interest you as a human being and every listener here that make you, right? And I think that we sort of have this like for us against us sort of binary. You're either a Bitcoiner or you're not. And I don't really think that's healthy yet, because I think the better discussion is what does it mean to be a Bitcoiner, right? So I think when people argue about Bitcoin toxicity or the state of the Bitcoin conversation, I don't really know if they're arguing about any of those things. Particularly, they're often arguing about other tangential things, such as are we is how our online behavior like encouraging to people? Are we promoting an idea of what it means to build on Bitcoin? And I find like those questions are much more interesting than sort of, oh, is this person a Bitcoiner or a real Bitcoiner? I don't know. I think we would probably both agree to start there as saying like there's definitely impossible standard, and I don't know who the perfect Bitcoiner is. Is it Michael Saylor? Is he the perfect Bitcoiner? Some Bitcoiners would disagree, right? So I prefer to look at it as you're aligned with Bitcoin or you're not. And I think you should, try to ask yourself if you are aligned with Bitcoin and then make decisions against that way. And we could talk about why that's a good lens, right? And why I think it's a helpful lens is people who are really in Bitcoin, what we're trying to do is build a better financial system for the world, right? And that if you think that is a worthy ethical cause, then I think it's worth applying that lens to your own life.